I love to be in the woods since I'm an average outdoors person. I love to be hunting, trapping, or just simply hiking in the woods, and even including camping in the woods from time to time. And in fact, my family always did that throughout my entire childhood. My family is from a small town in Michigan. We often went on camping trips to Indiana, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, or even in Ohio. I love to walk around in these places of my own. And I'm actually currently 25 years old, married, and have two boys of my own. And I have been telling them stories about my childhood when I was around their age, while growing up camping with my family. And they actually have also have been interested in camping. Since ever since me and my wife had our sons, we sometimes travel to Indiana or Ohio to do some simple camping trips for the summer. But there is one particular summer that's pretty much scared me 10 years ago. This was when I was just 15, and even this happened in Ohio, and it happened when also, if I was alone, I probably would not have, well, let's say, I wouldn't even have believed it if I was alone, if I saw this myself. But my older brother Robin was along with me. I will go back all those years ago, the time when he was 15 years old, and it well might be as a typical scary story, but uh, I mean, I was a little bit terrified when I first saw this in person. Let's set the scene. 10 years back in time, when I was just barely 15, and my older brother Robin, who was 2 years older, 17 at the time. We just had started our summer break from high school, and our parents actually had been debating where we should go for our next camping trip for about a week. We were talking about Kentucky or West Virginia, but I said, well, there has been a while since we have been in Ohio, and since we actually had some relatives who lives in Ohio, so we thought, why not? So we packed our minivan and traveled all the way from Michigan to Ohio. I'm not going to bore you with the trip, but it took several hours. And we actually went to many different places in Ohio for camping trips. But this time, my dad actually decided to take us to one place that we haven't been before. This was not like an official camping site, but it was actually middle of a park or quite dense woods. So we were like, why not? And if something would happen, we had some relatives not that far, maybe just an hour drive from this place. And when we arrived, we set up the tents and collected firewood, and after that was done, that was around early afternoon. So me and Robin, we did some more average exploring in the woods that we always do, since my family used also hiking while we were camping. We always had this urge to do some simple exploring of the vicinity area of the campsite, and it was probably something that our parents taught us when we were younger, which I have taught my sons as well. Because it is good to be familiarized your surrounding areas of the campsite. Because if you travel to a complete unknown, uncharted place, if you're saying it, and you would easily get lost. So if you would have some familiar, so at least where to go find back to the camp, easily to be in doing that. So we spent maybe almost 2 hours of tracking around in the woods, and we actually saw a lot of different animals, like from deers, rabbits, and a lot of birds. But suddenly, when we were this small creek, we noticed this strange track, like a footprint. Not a deer or a moose or even a bear, because we had been taught about what different type of um, footprint of animals from our dad, since he is a hunter himself, and it looked like a man's footprint, a little bit average, bigger than average one. And we thought maybe there was another camper in another hiker or camper, or maybe a local in the woods, barefoot. And we were like, it's a bit crazy, isn't it? Well, I mean, and as Robin said, well, this person is have a huge feet. He's even bigger than our dad's feet, for God's sake. Yeah, should we mention this to my parents? Probably. And then, so we didn't actually did much, and then we continued to do some exploring, and well, we saw a lot of signs of deers, rabbits, and even a few bear tracks and like that. But after a while, we went back to campsite. That evening, when we were just having our hot dogs, we mentioned this footprint to our parents. Of course, our parents, they weren't pretty much alarmed, since we were in a dense woods and there was a small town not that far from us. And on our way here, we saw actually official rest stops along the road. So it's possible this could have just been a local hunter or something. So we went after that. We talked about some more, and we went to bed or asleep. So for the next few days, we actually had a great time. We did a lot of hiking in the woods, and we even went to see our relative that lived not that far from town, in the small town next door, when we need get some more supplies. But one particular day, when my parents actually went into town to get some more food, just me and Robin were left behind, since we were old enough, and since Robin was 17, he is considered almost an adult in my parents' eyes, and he was quite responsible. So, and I wasn't actually alarmed. He actually also had his hunting rifle with him, because my dad had it with him, so just in case if something would happen. So we were sitting at the camp playing cards, and after maybe in an hour or so, we felt bored. So I was like, should we go to any woods, do some more exploring? And Robin's like, yeah, why not? I mean, we had been playing cards for almost an hour or two. So we went in the woods, and I brought my hunting knife with me just in case if something would happen. I should also mention this was before cell phones was really common among teenagers. So either me or Robin even had their own cell phone. So even if we did have, it wouldn't be much help here, because we were much in the middle of nowhere in a dense woods, and I don't think it would be any reception of the cell phones back then, though, if there were any common. But anyways, we were just hiking around in the woods, talking, saw a lot of signs of bears, wolves, or coyote, or other kinds of animals. But when we passed a creek, we saw another few more footprints. This time, it was the same size, but they were actually walking along the creek and then turning into the woods. I was like, we should probably try to follow those footprints, and at least see how far to go, if there's any other campsites nearby. Since Robbie was a little bit hesitating at first, but since he was an average hunter like my dad, so why not? So we did try to follow the footprint as best we could. I mean, first they was along the creek, easily to find. But when the footprints started in towards the forest, there were like a lot of not as many places to follow the tracks. But since our father is a hunter, he taught us how to observe some of the possible tracks in the wilderness, even if it's not on a grass sign or anything. So we managed to track those footprints. But we walked maybe for almost an hour deeper in the woods, and it was probably like 2 or 3 p.m. in the afternoon. We didn't know what else to do. I was getting hungry, and Robin too, but we were so far, and so far we hadn't even found any signs of any other campers or any hunters or any locals. And we didn't even know if this footprints was fresh or if they were a day or two, if they were just 1 or 2 day old. So we didn't know. So we continued walking and walking, but after a while, we were starting to get tired in the feet, so we sat down for one of these boulders or a tree stump just to relax for a moment before going back. But then suddenly we heard this strange sound, like a tree knock. I was like, I was like, Robin, do you expecting that if we find out that there was a Bigfoot in these woods? Robin laughed, and he actually did believe in Bigfoots and other cryptids, like myself. I mean, we have seen a lot of signs of people talking about exciting Bigfoots throughout the United States, especially on the West Coast. But we actually talked about the most famous one in this particular state of Ohio, the grassman. The grassman has been seen here since the late 70s. And this was around in the late 90s. And so we were just, but it was like, let's try if we can actually get a response from this supposed grassman. So I stood up, looked around, I found a branch and walked a tree, slammed it against the tree 3 times. Nothing. Again, tried again 3 times. At first it was silent, but then suddenly, bang, bang, bang from a distance. Both me and Robin looked at each other as almost confused and a little bit, and it was like a grin, like maybe it was a grassman. He started chuckled and said, "Try again." So I tried again 3 times, and it was same response, distant. And then he stood up and he tried from another tree. Sure enough, same response, but this time, after the 3 knocks, he heard this roar, like almost a scream. Robin felt a little bit petrified, but I felt amused. Now we get another response rather than just a typical 3 knock. We tried to we tried to mimic the sound back to this the one who actually made this sound, and it was actually something that screamed back, but this time it sounded much closer and louder. Now both of us felt like, well, I think it's time for us to head back to the camp. So we did. We walked slowly, but always looked behind us as we walked, just in case if something was following us. But as far after that, there were no more sound of tree knocking or roaring or screaming. And when we actually arrived to the campsite, our parents hadn't even arrived yet. And we decided not to mention this to our parents because they probably wouldn't believe us. Because my dad was like, there was probably another local trying to scare us for not coming too far, or too close. And that makes sense in some cases. But that evening, when we were just talking about some stranger things that's been happening, Robin did mention it, of course. And Dad was like, probably was a local who lives in the woods. But since this woods wasn't in any actual official national park, and this was like public land. So if there was a hermit or something living in the woods, it's possible they could mimic a sound like a bear or something to make us scare off. And that would make sense. And since we were only going to stay at this campsite for another few days, so me and Robin decided not to go that far in the woods again, because if there was a hermit, he could not be much happy about trespassers on his supposed land, or if he doesn't want to have any strangers near his home. So we decided to stay right as close too much as the campsite we did. And we had wished that there were a lake or something that we could swim, because it has been a hot summer this so far. But sadly, there weren't any. But we continued to explore the inner vicinity. We went always to this small creek, and we saw this strange footprints. And Both me and Robin was actually very much convinced it was the grassman who has been walking around in the woods. Even we told our parents about this supposed cryptid, about this Ohio's grassman existed. My mom dismissed it as just probably imagination that people have made up. I mean, consider the Bigfoot has been reported in for over a century and across the United States. So my mom's like, it's just like a mass hysteria condition or something like that. So, but I do believe a Bigfoot is real. And but on the last day before the day before we was going back home, me and Robin were just doing some other easily exploring around the woods. We did some tree knocks, no response. We tried to scream, no response. So maybe it wasn't a Bigfoot, maybe it was just something else. But then, that night, after we had all went to our tents, me and Robin shared one, and we were just laying there reading our books in our light flashlights. Our parents had already went to sleep, and I think it was around midnight when I decided it was time for me to do some sleep. And Robin had already passed out maybe a half an hour earlier, so I thought, maybe it's time for me to get some sleep. So I did. I turned off the light flashlight and just about to lay down and try to get some sleep when I suddenly heard this snap, like someone had stepped on a tree branch or a twig. I immediately sat up, terrified. Maybe there was something out there. I was looking for our tent had this like a small window, and ours was facing towards the woods. Even there was a pitch black outside. Even the campfire has been put out hours ago. So I didn't even know if I would which direction this sound came from. And as I looked, and suddenly, even there was a full moon, I saw this figure standing next to the tree line. I could see this almost like white eyes looking at us, at me. I whispered to Robin to wake up, and he was a light sleeper. So he was like, "What is it? Take a look at this." And I pointed at front of the small window, and he was like, "What?" And he was terrified. "That is definitely the grassman," he said. But suddenly, before anyone else could say anything else, this figure roared this loudest roar that I had ever heard. It almost like the same roar that we had heard a few days earlier. My parents just jumped out from the tent and turned around and faced the same thing as we were looked at. My mom screamed out of terror. My dad's like, "Who are you? What do you want?" And he actually had his rifle in the tent and pointing at him. But this figure didn't budge, didn't even move a single inch. And in fact, my dad fired up in the air a warning shot, but didn't seem to scare this figure. And he then took his flashlight and pointing at this creature, and it somehow didn't even got scared at all. But my dad and mom were like, now they were terrified. We screamed at this creature to leave us alone from inside the tent. The creature stood there for only more a few seconds, another loud roar before turning around slowly and walking in the woods. We ran out to the tent. Our parents asked me if we were okay. Yeah, we were okay, as we said. And we told them that was actually the Ohio grassman, the Bigfoot that we're telling you about. Now my parents really believe me because, first of all, we were in the middle of nowhere in a dense woods. And if there was a guy, a person, in some sort of a suit or a costume, who would be in the right mind walking around in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, in dense woods, in some sort of costume? It makes no sense because this was not much any houses in the vicinity. The nearest town was an hour away. There was no reasonable mind for anyone to do that. Ever since that night, my parents strongly believe this was the official Bigfoot sighting. My dad stayed up all night, having his rifle, and had a campfire running, while me, my mom, and Robin slept in one tent. He would keep an eye up, watch for the night, and we were in the morning a little bit scared, but well, who can blame us? But the next morning, after breakfast, me and Robin went to the spot where we saw this creature, and sure enough, footprints. We took a photo with our camera, and after that, we packed our tents in the minivan and drove home. And on the way home, it was almost entire silence, except we talked about what we thought it could have been, but we all agreed it was the grassman. Even though when we came home, some family friends and other family did ask us how our trip went. We were a little bit silent because we didn't know what to tell them or not. But we did tell them about what we did see. And we even showed them photos of the footprints. And and most of our family friends would probably believe us. But my mom said that it definitely was the Ohio grassman because she was not the type had never to lie. And in fact, she was she was easy to scare, but my dad, who was a very strong hunter, a former US Marine, he was not easily to be terrifying. But after they'd been hearing his side of the story, when they hearing his voice, almost they could sense he was afraid when he saw that. So they believed him. Ever since then, I had always wondered why did that the Bigfoot never actually came into our campsite in the first place. I mean, we didn't had any food out. Maybe he was just curious of looking at us. But then, ever since he was being seen for years before then, perhaps he was just curious to see who the strangers were on his land. And you may think ever went back to the same place to ever see him again. Oh yes, I actually went back there some years later when I was old enough to have my own car and when I was have my hunting license, and never saw it again. But I did hear some tree knocks and screaming in the distance. I know that was a Bigfoot known as the Grassman. My family, my own wife, my own sons, they believe me because they actually have seen the Ohio Grassman once themselves when we were on a trip when our sons were like 10 and 12. They strongly believe this. We are always believing that the Grassman exists in Ohio. As long as you don't disturb him, he won't disturb you. But just for the safe side, stay away from the Grassman. Thank you.